and I watched the show, and my response to her was, Made in Heaven is about marriages. How can this character be based on me? And within the first 5 minutes, Pallavi Menke is saying, my grandmother used to manually clean toilets. And that is a line that I've spoken over and over again, and that links back to being a Bhangi person. Maybe I missed an email. No, I don't think I heard from anybody before the show went on air. I think it's important to acknowledge more than beyond an Instagram, some kind of formal acknowledgement. I don't think it's fair to erase the contribution that I have made in terms of owning this term. There are folks out there who are saying they won't watch the episode, that they don't want to engage with this work. And I would say, don't do that.
Hello and welcome to the News Minute. Amazon Prime's Made in Heaven Season 2 is here. And episode 5, The Heart Skipped a Beat, has been getting rave reviews, particularly Radika Apte's portrayal of a Dalit scholar and author named Pallavi Menke. However, Yashica Dutt, a well-known journalist and author who wrote the book Coming Out as Dalit, has now come forward demanding that she get her due credit from the filmmakers. Joining us from New York is Yashica. Hello, Yashica. Thank you for joining us. Why do you believe that the character played by Radika Apte in the episode directed by Neeraj Ghaywan is partly based on you?
Yeah, I'm so glad you said partly, because I want to clarify that she goes on to get married in the episode and has a family that's relatively well-to-do. That's not the reality of me or my family. And I think this is important to acknowledge as well, because the arc is very different from my life. However, the reason I'm saying that this is similar to me or my life story or work is because the establishing shot that we see Pallavi Menke in is very similar to many of the interviews that I've done. And of course, the settings aside and how the body language and all of that, of course, that's a creative liberty. But what she says, the words that she uses are almost verbatim to words that I've used so many different times. Look at the similarities. This is a Dalit author at Columbia. Now, of course, I'm far from the first one. Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar was the first person from our community to be at Columbia, and I know and understand this is an homage to him. But then she goes on to say the words coming out, and she's written a book about coming out. I want to acknowledge and clarify here that many Dalits in history in India and across the world, we live with hiding our identities. That is the whole premise of my work. But I think I have to acknowledge, and as Dalit women, as women in general, we are asked to never take credit for our own work. And I think it's important for me to say that the phrasing coming out as Dalit entered the popular discourse thanks to a bit of my work. The book that I've written is called Coming Out as Dalit, which is an important contribution. And I think I have to stand up for myself and say, hey, that looks like me and that sounds like me. Moreover, Pallavi goes on to say that her grandmother worked as a manual scavenger cleaning toilets. So it's unfortunate that we are so limited in our representation that there is no other Dalit Bhangi author who, has been on this international platform and is talking about her book. And that was a bit unsettling because, some of the arguments, and not exactly that entire dialogue is not modeled on my words, but there are critical lines that I have spoken, and the similarities are unmistakable. I have to tell you, it wasn't me who noticed that. I wasn't even watching the show. I got hundreds, and I'm not joking, hundreds of Twitter DMs and Instagram messages before I even saw the show telling me that this character is based off of me. So this is not an idea that just germinated in my head, and it's not my hunch. It's coming from viewers who've seen the show.
Yeah, that was my next question. So when did you watch the show? And was there any kind of intimation before that this character was at least partly going to be inspired by you? Did you know beforehand about any of this?
I had no idea. I watched the show on Thursday. And like I said, it was a friend of mine who alerted me. And I watched the show. And my response to her was, Made in Heaven is about marriages. How can this character be based on me? That was my response to her. And she said, well, why don't you watch it? And within the first 5 minutes, Pallavi Menke is saying, my grandmother used to manually clean toilets. And that is a line that I've spoken over and over again, and that links back to being a Bhangi person, a Bhangi Dalit author at Columbia, talking about reservation, talking about coming out. The similarities were unmistakable.
The similarities were unmistakable, you say. And so you're saying that there was no one from the team, including the director, who had contacted you for any kind of permission?
I mean, I don't, maybe I missed an email. No, I don't think I heard from anybody before the show went on air. I was really excited to see what the show would bring. And I just want to say I love the episode. I think the story is told very powerfully. I think that comes across in my post as well. But it's important to sort of see my likeness on screen, which other people are seeing too, and say, hey, where's my credit?
Recently, the director had acknowledged you in an Instagram post. His words were, thanks to Yashica Dutt and her book Coming Out as Dalit, which made the term coming out become part of the popular cultural lexicon for owning one's Dalit identity. This inspired Pallavi's interview section. You have said that this is not enough and that you should be credited in the show. Why is this so important?
I really appreciate Neeraj going online, going on Instagram and acknowledging it to the show's viewers and people who are connected with him on Instagram. But let's be very clear, this is a global show. I saw it sitting in the US. Amazon Prime is the world's largest, if not the largest, streaming platform. This is going to be viewed by millions of Indians and non-Indians across the world. And I think it's important to acknowledge more than beyond an Instagram. Some kind of formal acknowledgement in some way is very important, especially because the character has such a similar likeness to my work, which is not very old. I came out as Dalit in 2016. So all the interviews and the words that I've said are very fresh in the public discourse. So I think as my book comes out in the US, it's important for me to make a connection that this is my contribution.
Right. But let me also ask, there are multiple things that are at play here, right? Showmakers can be inspired by someone, which they can do as long as they don't plagiarize or defame somebody, as long as they're playing it safe. Then there's the ethical question that you have raised. But there is also the legal perspective. And thirdly, there is the artistic license and freedom. Art mimics life. So why shouldn't an art piece be inspired or simply mimic a public figure?
I think that's a valid question and that's a very valid concern. But if you're taking from the life stories of marginalized people who have been erased out of their contributions, out of their work for centuries, the Hindi film space, the Bollywood space, it has a history of taking inspiration from everywhere and never crediting people at the source. So while you can say there is an artistic license and there's a creative license to base ideas on public figures, but the question is, am I a public figure in the same way that somebody would be who is recognized across the world? Can everybody look at that story and say, wow, that's Yashica Dutt? People who are familiar with my work, and I'm so thankful for them for raising their voices online and talking about it, they can identify it. But where I live in the United States, there is practically no identification. So when you are inspired by a public figure, their story has to be well known in a way for people to be able to say, yeah, this is clearly the inspiration. Then maybe there is no need for somebody to acknowledge, when Will and Kate and their marriage, Prince William and Kate Middleton, when their marriage spawned 1,000 biographies, there was no mistaking it was them. But here, there can be some kind of ambiguity. There can be some kind of confusion. And at the same time, I want to say, after the past couple of days, before I put out my statement earlier on Monday, a lot of people assumed I was a consultant on the show. People assumed that I had been contacted, I had been sought permission from, and that is why this was being done. I think it was important for me to clear that narrative and say that that did not happen. If people are making that assumption, and we all know how communications work, then it was my duty to clear the air and stand up for myself and say, hey, I was never contacted.
Yes. And that was a lot of what you said was also my next question. It must be tough to go public about your demand, considering that the director is a well-known and respected filmmaker. So, what are your thoughts on the lines between solidarity in a larger movement, a movement that is working towards a collective goal, and also demanding the due credit and respect for your work? And how do you see the gender plays a role in this, particularly in progressive movements?
I think that's such a great question, Bhati. Thank you for asking that. Um, Gender plays a very important role in the way women are expected and are supposed to respond to their work being taken away, to demanding their credit. I think there is absolutely a place for solidarity in larger movements, and which is why I'm here telling you that I love Neeraj Ghaywan's work and I will continue to support it. This is something that I've said right from the get go. But at the same time, how do we navigate the space while standing up for ourselves and standing up for not having our work being erased, standing up for demanding credit where credit is due? I think this is a very complicated issue. I've written about this. This is not something that gives me immense pleasure. When I love that episode, it is so important for the community. Pallavi is a standout Dalit character, the likes of which has not existed before in Indian cinema, in Indian television space. It gives me no pleasure to come and say, this is not good enough, or create any kind of negative commentary about that. In fact, my effort has been to create a positive commentary around it. The only thing I'm saying is, if the character has this kind of immense likeness where hundreds and thousands of people can identify it without me telling them, then I think credit is where credit is due. Women are expected to shrink themselves, to support the men, to always cover up for mistakes that have been made. What I'm doing right now is not covering up a mistake that was being made, which is to say that I was not contacted. I could have easily said and gone on with the false narrative that, of course, this was all above board. All I'm doing is going against the grain and standing up for myself, because if I don't stand up for myself as a Dalit woman, then I don't think anyone else will.
Your publishers, LF, have also extended their support to you. Do you believe that your book has ensured that there is some kind of copyright for your life and work?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true, right? I mean, my book is published in the Indian subcontinent as coming out as Dalit by Aleph, and now it is getting published in the United States with Beacon Press as a revised edition with additional chapters. So there is not just one, but there are multiple copyrights of the words coming out as Dalit in terms of my own story that exist. So this is clearly an IP issue here as well. Whether we can get into that right now, or whether that is something that can be seen through, those are separate ideas. But at the same time, to answer your question, whether a copyright exists, there absolutely does. I mean, if I can tell you, I own the film and television rights to my own story, for both the territories, for both the Indian territory and the global territory as well. And this is not the first time that I was, approached or not approached about my life story. In the past couple of years, in the past 4 years, I've been approached several times, including with big production houses who are based in India, to adapt my story. It's just something I never felt ready for at the time. And I feel I'm still not ready because my book is not out in the US. So I wasn't ready to do it then, but I have a decent understanding of how this area works and why permissions are necessary.
After you went public, did anyone from Made in Heaven team reach out to you? And what is it that you expect from them now?
I don't think I've heard anybody from anybody officially yet. The expectations is, this is not. This is a space of reconciliation. This is not an antagonistic space. That's not what I am looking for. I'm looking for credit. I'm looking for due acknowledgement. And of course, if, need be, then compensation as well, because this is, again, not something that I've put forth in the realm, but from everybody that I've heard, this is a for-profit enterprise on the world's largest streaming service. And if a copyright has been used, and that is again a very legal issue, which I'm not a lawyer, so I cannot comment on, but if that has been used in some way, or if that can be proven, then there is, compensation that is necessary. But at the same time, what I'm looking for is credit and acknowledgement, and to be clearly identified that that piece of the story links back to me.
Moving a little away, there has also been some discussions about Savarna actors playing the roles of Dalit women, which is what has happened in this case too. So is this something that you'd like to comment on as well?
I think I fully understand why people feel the discomfort with having Radika Apte, who is, if I'm not mistaken, a Brahmin person, portray a Dalit character. I think the way we have only now in the recent years started acknowledging caste in a larger mainstream discourse, just in, I would say since the death of Rohit, when we have seen a new kind of wave of Dalit consciousness that has taken place in digital media and in mainstream media. It's too soon for us to have Brahmin actors play Dalit people. So if the discomfort that people experience with her saying, my grandmother manually cleaned toilets, when this is a Brahmin person, I can appreciate that, and I understand how that feels, especially because like this is also my experience. But at the same time, I wonder whether Bollywood industry or Hindi film industry, Indian television and cinema space, are they at that level of representation where they are willing and open to cast Dalit actors for Dalit roles, or they're willing to cast Northeastern actors for Northeastern roles, or trans actors for trans roles. I'm not quite certain if they're there yet. I think Radika Apte did an excellent job portraying a Dalit person, but the discomfort of the awareness that this is, a Brahmin person who's saying these words, who's embodying that spirit, I fully understand that, and I feel the same way on some level.
You have written many times that revealing your caste identity has been a painful experience. You have talked about the abuse. You've written about it. You spoke about it earlier in the interview as well. So now, do you feel that there is a certain disappointment further, and that when you again have to come out and demand credit, that your life is opened up to further discussion?
Yeah, I mean, none of this, like, I want to reiterate this again and again. This is not an easy experience for me. I mean, I understand people who are back in India possibly think of living in New York, living in the US as a very, maybe, and I've been told this, like a glamorous lifestyle. But the fact is, I freelance as a writer here. So this is, we're all in the global economy, we're all at a period of struggle at this point. And then to open myself up for discussion in the same way is something that gives me pause. And the barbs that I'm experiencing, along with, I would say there's been 97% of positive commentary, but of course there are differences of opinions, there are different opinions that are out there, and I just have to learn to take them on my stride. I'm not an actor, I'm not a film director, I'm not a celebrity in that way. I'm just a journalist with a book. And I think when that happens, when people are so invested in your life, it is a choice that I made, 8 years ago, when I chose to come out as Dalit, when I chose to invite people in my public life. And I was aware that this was a consequence. It still is jarring at times. I mean, of course, I'm a human being. But at the same time, I think, sometimes in order to push the narrative forward, people only acknowledge your story if they see you bleed. This is something that I've heard from Dalit feminists over and over again. I've heard from my good friend Christina is also a Dalit feminist herself. You've spoken to her, I'm sure, many times. She says that people only acknowledge your pain if they see you bleed. And if this is the cost of us getting the credit where there is due, then I guess I don't have a choice but to pay that.
Thank you, Yashika, for joining us. And are there anything else that you would like to say at this point? Any last words in the interview?
Yeah, I just like to say that there are folks out there who are saying they won't watch the episode, that they don't want to engage with this work. And I would say, don't do that. I think there is so much value to this work. I think it will give you, if you're a non Dalit person in particular, such an important and significant perspective of what it means to navigate your identity between the two worlds. I think it's important to understand that. So I would say, please do acknowledge that, do understand that. But at the same time, I appreciate the demands for credit that have come from so many different people. And I do want to say that this is a fight that I am waging for myself and my future self. Because as somebody who hopes to have a somewhat longish career, I hope I'm only in my 30s. If I let folks get away with not acknowledging my work now, then I'll have to do it at some point in my life. And I'm just fighting the fight for myself now when I can. So I hope that comes across.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thank you
Yashika.
so
Thanks
much.
for joining.